Yeah, thank you.
So here we go. Today's discussion, I wanted to go over the accounts payable, some of the things that are commonly overlooked in accounts payable. Also wanted to talk a little bit about some reporting, a couple of reports that I like the most and some that get confused or underused. And then I wanted to discuss business insights a little bit, the desktops and the dashboards, and the Explorer and some of the reporting tools. So let's get right to it. One of the things I do when I want to talk about a module is I go around to the other folks on the 100 team here and try to get their thoughts on what kinds of questions they get the most on. And so one of the first things, or one of the things that most clients don't use much, or could use more often to enhance their reporting and enhance their business. One of the things that was brought up was the idea of using sort fields. And we're not an AR, Pat, we're an AP today. AP allows, in the vendor maintenance screen here, allows you to add a sort field in the additional tab, tab 2, down here at the bottom. And what this allows you to do is it's simply another way to group vendors together for reporting purposes and other purposes, but mostly for reporting. And so if I went through my vendor list and started to group vendors by a sort code, and this is simply a text field here. I could change this to whatever I want, and then went through and ran a report. Let's just say the vendor listing. Most of the reports here will allow you to sort by sort field and select by sort field, and so you can sort by sort field here. So that would be simply sorting the report itself by that sort code, or you can come down here and select by sort field. And I don't remember what we had in that vendor maintenance screen. We had airway. So if I type in airway here, equals, change the filter to equal to airway, we should just get 01 airway here. Yeah, 01 airway. So if there were more vendors with that particular sort code assigned to it, we would get all of them. And I think that might be useful for any number of reasons: marketing reasons, reporting by sales. You know, maybe you separate your vendor, purchasing. I mean, you would separate your vendors by product line, or you know, any number of ways. You can use your imagination on how you might want to group vendors together, sort them, or report on them. So that's one good one. That one came up with a couple of my colleagues in the 100 group here. Another thing in the vendor maintenance screen that was useful that folks underutilize is the inactive reason screen, or the inactive reason field here. And this has been useful to many clients in order to identify why we stopped doing business with a given vendor. And you know, we can go through and make a comment here about why. We can also say, give it a status. So if we wanted to make airway inactive, we can't, obviously, because there's transactions out against it. But if there were a vendor that we wanted to inactivate, we could change it to inactive here and give it an inactive reason code. And then we could report on that, or it would just give us a little more information. In this particular case, we could say that airway gave us a lack of quality in our parts. We could put any number of inactive reason codes here. And so over time, this becomes useful because right, wrong, or indifferent, people come and go from organizations, and having a record of how and why we parted ways with a given firm can be useful to us. Did they go out of business? Did we not like our relationship? Did we have an issue? So take a look at the inactive reason code as something you could use. You could also, you know, somebody else said something about the inactive code, and they said, you know, you could enhance it with a memo. You could create an inactive reason here called memo, and then create a memo here up in memo maintenance, and have an entire discussion about why a given vendor, we parted with a given vendor. So that's another way to utilize it. You could, as a reference to another document that might give you more enhanced information about a given relationship with a vendor. Next up, 1099 setup. So in more recent versions of Sage 100, we've had a little bit more enhancement in terms of what's available over here in the 1099 box. Also in the Vendor Maintenance Master under the Additional tab. The 1099 form section allows you to set up a vendor for 1099 payments and 1099 data collection, ultimately resulting in the ability to cut a 1099 form and properly address vendors who you engage on a 1099 basis. So we have the ability, I'll just run through these functions real quickly here. Most clients already know how to use this, but it's useful to kind of get down to some of these other functions down here. So if it's an individual person, somebody who makes a certain product for you, you might give them the default form of miscellaneous, but there are two other options, an interest or dividend form. And then you could give them the social. And then we have the ability to tell the system, it's not happy with me because it doesn't like that social security number, but the default box number will basically default by transaction what box the total will arrive in by default. So on the 1099 form. So if we chose 7, this vendor's transactions by default would end up in the default box number 7. That could be changed, of course. The miscellaneous box 9, there are a couple reasons why you would want to have that checked or not checked, and that's a matter of some accounting and tax law and such. So I would leave that to you guys, but you do have the ability to check or uncheck the miscellaneous box 9. Further, the electronic consent signed box. I'm not sure that some of our clients have this in the older versions. You would select this box if the vendor has given consent to receive a 1099 form electronically instead of as a paper copy. And if you do check this box, 1099s processed through our e-filing and reporting will only be sent as electronic copies. So there's some integration here to some other functionality in the system. And finally, the FATCA box, F-A-T-C-A box, if you're required to report payments based on the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act regulations, you would check that box. And so that's a box that requires a little bit of research before you check on it. We also have the ability to add 1099 history to a vendor's 1099 bucket utilizing this button. If I say yes to this, I'm able to go in and adjust historical 1099 here. I think that's what I'll show you for now in terms of just master record, vendor maintenance kind of stuff. Dee Dee, I thought I'd pause for a second to make sure there were no questions. It was pretty straightforward, and a lot of clients know about this already, but those were the greatest hits from me talking to the 100 team.
No, there are no questions right now.
Awesome. I'll keep rolling.
Thank you.
So vendor maintenance, we're done with that for now. Some of the other things that my colleagues talked to me about were when I would walk around the office and ask them, they talked about certain other functionalities in AP that maybe clients aren't utilizing. One of those is invoice payment selection. We're able to, with this function, collect large groups of payments by invoice due date, by discount date, etc. You can select them here using this drop-down. And if I click the select button here, I can see that's out there by those parameters. And then I'm able to choose which checks I want to write, which payments I want to write here. And if I hit OK, those will go into the processing bucket and can be accessed via check printing and electronic payment. So I basically just controlled exactly which vendors and what payments I wanted to make to those vendors using this function. And so when I go down here to check printing electronic payment, those checks would be the only ones that print. Now, I also have the ability to be more selective in terms of how I see payments or how I select payments. I can do that down here in the select field. This is very similar to any other reporting field or any other process field in the system. So I could just choose to pay a certain vendor here and hit proceed, and it would create check records for all of the vendors in that route, in that range. So this is a pretty useful function to get to paying large numbers of checks all at once. One of the things I can do once I've grabbed those payments is, let me see, do I still have them out there? Let me purge that off and redo it. And that way I know what I'm going to see in the next screen. If I just grab those guys, it gives us a total at the bottom of what the total amount you're getting ready to write checks for, 26.5. Okay, those are now in there. Sure why that X didn't show up there. I can go into check and electronic payment maintenance now. And by vendor number, I'm able to modify exactly how much I'm paying each one of these. So this $25,000 invoice here, we're not going to pay all of. We're going to pay 10,000 of it instead. And so what this will do, once I hit accept, we'll cut the checks. And this check will be for 10 grand instead of 25 grand. And in the vendor record, once we pull up that invoice again, the June 4913 invoice, you'll see that there is $15K still outstanding on that invoice, but that we'd applied $10,000 to it. So that's a pretty nice function. I'm not sure a lot of folks know that that exists, and that's a nice way to partial pay certain invoices that come up. So I'll cancel out of that. Close out of that. Another area where there may be some confusion or maybe some confusion about functionality is the ability to apply a credit note, an existing credit note, to an existing invoice. And one of the ways, the way you do that would be to come into manual check and payment entry. And use the letters APP. This tells the system, and that you can follow it with 3 numerics if you like. This tells the system we're getting ready to apply one document to another, meaning we're going to apply a credit memo to a invoice. And so if I hit tab out of that, you can see the check amount is 0 because it knows we're getting ready to apply. And so if I go into Airway again, I could leave it, I could say this is a test credit, apply a credit note. If I choose the credit note first, in this case, there's a credit note down here for $1,000. You can see that it's got a negative next to it. And then I go find the actual invoice that I want to apply it to, 4444, and I hit accept and post it. Change this back. We'll just run through the registers quickly here. I have the recaps turned on here. And yes, I do. And no, I don't. And then I can come back here to the vendor maintenance screen and see that transaction has happened. So if I go down to invoices here, I can see 444 right there has that check, that a credit note applied to it. So that's how that works. You can also apply a partial credit note to an invoice similarly by, I'll go in there and quickly do that. So let's say the invoice, you're just going to apply a smaller credit note to an invoice. I'll explain that in just a second. The same method applies here, and it's on the same vendor. If I come over here and choose 777, see I'm at the $250 credit memo, and apply that to a $500 invoice, and I change that to $250 and accept. It'll have the same effect except leaving $250 outstanding on that invoice. So I hope that's helpful. Post that through. So we won't have to go back up to the vendor to look at that. So moving forward, the next of the greatest hits was void versus reverse, and we run into this quite a bit. Clients will, first of all, there are some terminology issues at play when we talk to customers about this, and there are process issues. So a client will often call in and say, I voided this check. What they really mean in Sage 100 terms is that they reversed that check. A void is only available to a non-tendered check. So if you've applied a payment to an invoice, you're really reversing that transaction when you go in. So one of the things that a consultant like me has to do is decide is to figure out which one actually just happened. Do they reverse it or do they void it? What's the status of that check? And so that requires a little looking. But in general, when you void a check, you're essentially taking it out of circulation. And it has not been tendered. So at the time of printing, let's say the paper crinkles up or somehow the check numbers are out of sync or whatever, and you need to void them, that's when you would do it, at the time of printing them. Reversing, however, gives you the ability to recall the invoice for which that payment was created. We can walk through that process. If we go into manual check and payment entry here, if someone called me and said, I need to reverse this one check, typically they would say, I need to void this check, but what I really think they mean is that they want to reverse this check because they want to reopen that invoice and repay it somehow. Maybe they gave the incorrect date to the check. It's paid in the wrong period. So what I would do here is let's say, I think I have a check in here already, 14, let's just say, and it should ask me, is this a check reversal? And in this case, I'll say yes. And often, do you want to recall invoices paid by this check? Almost always, I'm consulting folks to say yes to this. And that would recall the balance of the invoice so that we could actually do something with it. If you say no here, the invoice will stay closed, but you will have reversed the check. And so, personally, my instinct is to ask a client to recall the invoice so that we could then do something with it, like cut a credit note against it if we want to put it into a different period. We could adjust it. We could do all kinds of different things to it with it open. With it closed, our options are a little more limited, and we have to do a little bit more complex work in the ledger using a distribution in another check entry to get it to clear out. So if I say yes to this and accept, I can go through that whole process and reverse that check, and then the actual invoice is open for processing again. So that's the difference. Reversing a check, actually you have the ability to reopen the payable and do something with that payable. So almost always I'm telling folks to actually reverse it. Also, I might point out here, let me just check my note here. I'm always saying, that I'm always reminding people, and this goes for any question they have, that they can always go down to the help menu, and that gives a decent explanation as to what a voided check is and what a reverse check is. How do you go about each of those, etc. You'll find a lot of other good instruction here as well. Another thing that we discuss a lot about is the idea of adjustments. So the clients will call in and say, I want to lower or raise the amount on a given invoice, and that would require an adjustment for us. And so let's find an invoice that we could adjust here. I can walk through that process. Let's look at Airway again. Maybe there's an invoice out there we can look at. It's open. That one has a payment. All these guys have payments on them already. Who knew? Here's one. That's a $25,000 one. So June 4913. It's been paid. Shoot. One more try for another invoice that's paid. Invoice 33. Let's try invoice 33. Entry 3. Oops. Airway. Invoice 33. Oh, everything's been paid. All right, so I create an invoice. Oh, great. 1, 2, 3, 4 exists. Perfect. So immediately the question pops up. This is already on file, telling you that you already have used this invoice number, and what do you want to do with it? You have two options: hold payment for this invoice, or produce a second check for this invoice. No problem there. What we want to do is adjust it. And right now there's a. Let me go back because I want to cancel that. So let me go back 1 second because I missed something. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. There we go. So I can effectively move this balance up and down by the adjustment amount here. If I say negative $25, that will lower the payable by $25 after I post it. If I want to raise it, it's just a positive number here. And once I post this, you'll see in the invoice details that the balance has been raised or lowered, and you'll see the adjustments stack up underneath it. So let's take a look at this. Let's look at check the lines, 25. Excellent. So this should effectively raise the balance. Let's post this through. I remember to turn off the recaps. Yes. No. Okay, and let's check this vendor maintenance again. We'll look for invoice 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's that invoice? There it is. So there's that adjustment, $25. There's some payments on it. So we have the ability with the adjustment function, when you enter into invoice data entry, put in the invoice, it will automatically, it knows if it's been used or not, will automatically ask you if this is an adjustment, and you can raise or lower that balance with a positive or negative number and posting it through. It helps if there's good data to test with and to show you guys with. So thank you for your patience on that. Last thing for AP, we're about 25 minutes in now. Last thing for AP is expense distribution. Very few clients use this one, and I'm not sure why. There's a good business case for it. If I go into invoice data entry and I choose 02 Telecom, we're going to see something about that in just a minute. But I'm going to back up and go to Setup, and then expense distribution table maintenance. And what this allows me to do is create tables that we can choose to then distribute the balance of a payable to different accounts in the account section of invoice data entry. In this case, I have two different codes set up here. A phone one, which has got some 6535 balance between the two GL accounts I've named here. You can name many other accounts, by the way. And then utilities, it's just a 50-50 split between departments. So once you've set up these tables, then you have the ability to choose those tables at the time of payment. So if I come in and I create this invoice and give it an amount of $5,000, this is to a telecom company, and I choose the distribution table phone, you'll see that it's automatically done the distribution by account here. So this helps us a lot in terms of not having to, if you have set ways that you distribute expenses across departments in your chart of accounts, this is a good way to get that stuff there automatically and effectively without having to do the math. So that's how that works, and it's pretty useful, and few clients use that actually. So, and again, that's set up. I'm not going to save that. That's set up down here in Setup, Expense Distribution Table Maintenance. And clients that do use it for utilities, insurance, different kinds of payments that happen that require multiple distributions across a number of accounts by percentage or by other means. So I'll pause right there because we're about to finish up with AP and move on to some reporting and the business insights piece. And so if there are any questions, feel free to take the moment now and email and send them in to Dee Dee in the chat function of the webinar. I'll just take a quick pause for that. And move on to business insights. Business insights is another way in Sage 100, among many ways, to look at data in a different way other than direct reporting or through an inquiry screen that you might be familiar with in Sage 100. Dashboards, the Business Insights section has 3 basic functions: dashboards, reporting, and Explorer. And first off, the most visually attractive piece of Business Insights are the dashboards. And I've created a dashboard here that will populate based on the date that I give it here. And what I've done here is, by user, I have created a set of queries that automatically show up on the main screen here when I click Display the Dashboard. And you can set this data to refresh every so often, however you see fit, however often is useful. But you're able to see a lot of interesting information at a glance here. And you might group these together so that they make more sense. Maybe vendors, top vendors and AP aging at the top, and then top customers and AR aging, and then maybe sales by division here. This is pretty nice. You can tell who's selling what office is doing the best. Our top customers, you can see who the top customers are period to date. And some income statement details is, of course, sample data. So you could see at a glance at that moment what things look like for your organization. And this is useful for all kinds of different folks in an organization. It might be good for an executive or a CFO or a controller who needs to know just the status, and then follow up with folks that report up through their structure and get answers to certain questions that jump out at them on these dashboards. As I said earlier, you can create these by user, and one of the ways you do that is by going into the maintenance wizard here. And I created one for the OCS user, and there are a ton of options. All of these different screens over here are available. And when I say screen, I mean these are the widgets that show up in the dashboard over here. So there's the ones that I created for my particular setup over here. And if I could maybe arrange these a little more effectively. If I could move payables aging up to the top vendors, move cash flow down, and then sales by division, the top, move top customers back up, and move cash flow. That sounds good right there. Let's try that. And if I hit finish here and then refresh the dashboard, it will ask me, based on my settings, if I want to actually refresh all the data. And as you can see, it has moved the screens around and made it a little bit more logical. And so these can be set up, like I said, by user. So an AP person might be interested in what the payables aging look like at a glance. So you could set them up with just that one. But there are lots of options, and there's some reporting here to tell you what users have what screens, and there are ways to automate the way the dashboards refresh. And so that's pretty nice. That's a nice way to access data quickly and in a visual way without having to run a big report. Moving forward from there is the reporter function of Business Insights. And this basically is a Crystal Reports wizard, for lack of a better term. This function allows us, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because there are some data elements that you have to understand in order to be able to use this. You can experiment with it all day long and create reports and all kinds of queries, but it may not make any sense unless you actually have some understanding of databases. And of course, we can help you with that if needed, or you can just have at it and see what comes up and design your own reports. But basically, it allows you to go into a system. I'll actually create one all the way to the end, and we can take a look at how that works. So if I want to create a report here, I went into Business Insights Reporter, and next, and I could name it test, give it a description, and this is asking you what kind of format do you want it in. I'll say portrait. These are all common settings in Crystal Reports that you would require in order to write a report correctly. And then it's asking you what kinds of what views do you want to use for your reports, meaning what groups of data would you like to include in your report? In our particular case, what if we said customer invoices? And then in customer invoices, we say where's the open invoice? Customer open invoice. From here, it goes into that view, and it offers you a lot of different fields that you can put into play here. And I might say, I might grab a couple of these, and there's the balance field. There should be one here. There it is. And so what I'm doing is I'm grabbing data elements onto this report, and the system is telling me what the next steps are. It's a nice wizard. And so how do I want to sort these? I want to sort them by customer number, let's just say. And then it tells you how do you want to format what data, where do you want the data. So I'll have the customer page header, and we'll put this here in details A, and invoice type in details A, and balance in details A. So, and the more you experiment with this, the better you'll get at it. And then I can set up filters. So if you're familiar with Crystal Reports at all, this will make sense to you. And you know, one of the last things the Crystal Report asks you before it presents the actual report is how do you want to filter the data. In this case, I'll just say all customers. And next, and I don't want to chain it to a report. There's lots of different functions here we can do. I'll assign it to a role here at the end, so that it tells the system who's allowed to see it, people who are assigned to certain roles. And let's see what we get here if I run that report. It pops that filter, and it knows that we want all customers. I'm hoping I'm going to get something here, and I do. And so it's all customers and all invoices by all customers, and it's several pages long. And so it was that quick to put together a report, and that's held here in our roster of other reports that I've created. And so it was pretty easy to generate a Crystal report to get to simple information. It has its limitations in terms of how you relate data and grab data that doesn't exist in the table that you're looking for. There's all kinds of stuff like that that requires some advanced Crystal understanding. But it's a nice tool to generate reports with, and then modify later. I could go back in and modify any of these. I could open them in Crystal itself and modify the reports that I've created in Insights Reporter. It also gives me the ability to run a report on the reports that I've created. So, and it has import and export, meaning I could import and export Business Insights reports from other systems and bring them in here. So, basically, the reporter is a Crystal Reports wizard that can create some fairly nice and simple reports if you have an understanding of databases. Finally, Explorer is probably my favorite piece of this functionality, and that it allows you to look at the data in mass in a different way and slice and dice the data in ways that are meaningful to you on the spot. So if I go in here and I choose the customer open invoices view right here, it will open the Explorer view. And it opened on the wrong screen. Well, you can see that. I need to move there we go. So what we're seeing here is the open invoice table laid out in an Access/Excel kind of feel. And when I click on an invoice at the top, this is the invoice header record here, I get the details of it down below. So if I click through these, you'll see what details there are on a given invoice. And once we have this data here, you'll notice over here there are other options. I could look at invoice history or customer payments individually over here. There are more ways to slice and dice this data. But for now, I created a kind of a demo here where I could choose, if I grab the salesperson and drag this guy up here, you'll see that it has inserted groups by salesperson. So now all of my open invoices are separated by salesperson. And this guy up here is empty, so there's no salesperson assigned to any of these. But if you scroll down, you'll see Ginny Hernandez here, and then another header of Harvey Earl Wright. And further, I could drag the due date. So I could drag the due date, and it would subcategorize underneath, or sub-filter, or lay the data out underneath salesperson. So now I have my invoices by due date by salesperson. I could then grab customer, stick that under here. So now I have by due date by customer by salesperson. I could then I could add summary footers and group footers here. So I could go over here and just right click and say sum, and that would populate a sum by customer by due date. So basically I'm filling out this spreadsheet. I could go in here and also say, and give it a final summary down here, and say sum, and that tells me all of the AR that I have out right now in total. Okay, once I've set this all up, once I've separated all that stuff out and sliced and diced the data the way I want, I could then filter it all out and look at it just by Jim Kentley's, let's say. So I filtered it by dropping this button here and choosing Jim, so similar to like a filter in an Excel spreadsheet. And now I have a spreadsheet. I have basically all of Jim's data. And I could take that and email it directly to him. So if I tell it to email that, I may need my Outlook open to do that. And I send that, this is what you're going to see on the inbound email. It's going to send him a document that has all of his open invoices by due date, by customer, so that he can act on them if he needs to. Just an interesting way to get data moved around and disseminated to the right people. So that's a pretty cool way of going about getting to data. If I click on any given invoice, I'll see the details of that invoice down here. And as you can see, I'll close this, I don't want to save this. There are tons of views already in the system, and they're available in all modules. So you'll see them in two places here. The account view, account transactions view, and budgets view are down here under GL. Similarly, AP or AR has some. And so you can access them from multiple places. You're also able to, if I go back into Customer Open Invoices view one more time, you can also add and subtract more fields from this. This comes with a default set of fields assigned to it. I could add, where's my button here, to column selection here. I can add, like a salesperson number I could stick in here, right next to salesperson. So now I have a salesperson number. These are available fields that aren't currently in the Explorer. And in different places, if you open up a different one, you might see more options that you can pull in. We did that with a client the other day, and she was very happy that we could actually grab that data and have it all in one place like that. So that's how the Explorer works, and it's super useful.
Pat?
Yeah.
Pat?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, it's Dee Dee. I have a couple questions. Is this a good time?
Yes, sure. I was getting ready to stop. Go ahead.
Okay. The question is, I assume that the report can then be printed. I believe it was a report that you just emailed.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so yes to that. And then it looks like we have a question regarding AP. Is there any way to change several default GLs on a vendor in AP?
So we want to, I guess my assumption is go ahead, Dee Dee.
Oh, I was just going to repeat it again. Is there any way to change several default GLs on vendors in AP?
I'm assuming this is the data entry GL they're referring to in an AP vendor, on the AP vendor record. And I have to think about that a little bit, about the best way to go about that. There may be a way to change vendors. That's not it. There may be a utility where I can go through and change that stuff en masse. But one of the best ways might be just to do a visual integrator import, depending on how many there need to be changed. We'd have to identify which ones we want to change and which ones we want to change and what we want to change it to, and that would kind of determine the best way to go about doing that. But I've done it with a visual integrator export import, and I'm sure others on my team have done it many different ways, but that would be my first thought given the understanding I have of the issue, to do it in math. I hope that answers the question. I'm happy to expand on that later, offline if you want.
I'll verify with her.
Okay. Thank you, Dee.
Thank you.
Is that it? Is that the only other question?
At the moment, that's it.
Okay. Okay, I will proceed then. A couple more things I wanted to just get out there. It's 11:42 now. I'm going to get in underneath the wire, I think, without a problem. A couple of reports that I wanted to talk about to finish off our webinar today. The first are the audit reports. And so basically what they do, the auditing function in Sage 100 allows you to track changes that happen to master records. And when I say master records, in this case, I mean GL account, I mean AR, oops, I lost my screen there for a second, AR customer, AP vendor, inventory management item. And so if you go into the setup of any of these given modules, if I go into GL setup here, I can, where's my audit? GL account audit here. At the moment, I have it set to account changes to track to all. I can say all. I can have it the auditor log all deletions, all additions and changes, and then I can tell it to track additions in detail. And so what this allows you to do is find out how a certain record changed. And in this case, I'll show you. I made some changes, and I can go back through and run an audit report. And so you'll find the account audit report here in GL. And if I just hit preview, it's going to grab whatever changes are out there. Let's see what they are. So the user that changed them was OCS. That was me. And these are the things I changed about that particular account. I gave it a new start date. I changed a roll-up code. I've changed 2 roll-up codes. And at the end, it'll ask you if you want to purge the audit file. I'm going to say no. Similarly, this can be set up in AP. And you'll find the subledger, the submodule subledgers setups in the, let me see if I remember. Oh, got a couple things open here. You'll see in the additional, where is it? In the history, sorry. In the history tab of the subledgers, AP, AR, and inventory, you'll find vendor changes to track. Same exact functionality. And so once you have those turned on and it's listening for changes, you could go in and if there was something changed about a vendor or customer and nobody knows why, or a facet or a feature of an inventory item changed, you could come in and we could run the vendor audit report here just to check out the vendor changes here. So that can be very useful. Some folks worry about a performance, a hit to performance, since the system is listening and will make additions to the log every time a change is made. In this case, we haven't seen a lot of performance problems with it because it's basically doing another task right on top of the actual change that you're making to write to the log. And initially, I thought there might be issues with that. There really have not been any performance problems with that. Unless, of course, you're doing a massive import of thousands of vendors, you know, it may want to log every single change right away, and so that could be a problem. But you could easily turn it off for that particular event. So those audit reports are very useful, especially at go lives, or maybe right at the beginning when you're first starting out with Sage 100. They might be really nice to kind of find out who's doing what to what records. Finally, this is a big one, is the AP trial balance versus the aged invoice report. So when do I use these, and what are they useful for? And I'm trying to balance to my general ledger and this report or that report doesn't balance. Here's the rule of thumb. If you're going to use, you need to use the trial balance to tie off to the GL. So the AP trial balance uses the transaction date or the posting date, which is how the transactions actually hit general ledger. And so date issues across periods are less of an issue with this particular report. So we want to print this report to check off against the general ledger if we're trying to balance, tie out to the GL's balance. Use the aged invoice report if you want to see invoices by invoice date or due date. So an example of that is if you find a document with an invoice date of July 15th, it might, for some reason, it might post in August and have a transaction date of August 1. And this can throw off your efforts in trying to tie out to the GL if you're trying to tie out to the GL against your report. So that's how those two are differentiated, and that will clear up some problems for people, I hope. That is really all I had as far as reporting for today as it pertained to AP and just generally speaking. And I'm running up on 50 minutes now. I want to be sensitive to everyone's lunch. Dee Dee, I feel like I'm about done with my list of items. I hope this has been valuable for everyone. If there are any questions, I'd love to answer them now, or I'll set you free.
Let's see here. It doesn't look like there's anything on the chat or the question box. So we will be done for today. We will be recording this. It will be on our website, and I can send a copy to you. So we thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you all very much for spending time with me. Take care. Talk to you soon.
Bye now.